Record button now. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Brandy Payne. Welcome to Beating Stress and Burnout at Work. Today's workshop is going to be shared both on my website and on the National Hope Talks Movement's website. Just a reminder, if you feel more comfortable with your video off, please feel free to leave it off. If you feel more comfortable with your video on, please feel free to leave it on. Everyone's muted just to kind of keep the recording focused on whoever's speaking. And if you have any questions that you want to have answered, you can pop them in the chat. We're going to be doing a question period at the end of the workshop. But then also, if you have any questions that you want to ask, but you don't necessarily want your name associated with them, then do send them in privately in the chat to workshop co-host Carla Lloyd, and she'll make sure that they get answered as we go through this. As I said, I'm Brandy Payne. I'm a workplace mental health consultant, which means that I work with teams of all sizes to help them beat stress and burnout at work so that they're mentally healthier, happier, more resilient, and better able to do their jobs no matter what happens. I'm certified through the Canadian Mental Health Association as a workplace psychological health and safety advisor. And fun fact, I also used to be the Associate Minister of Health for Alberta and was responsible for mental health and substance use across the province. So for our conversation today, we're gonna, sorry, I thought I had an agenda slide. We're going to start with a bit of an overview about all of the terms. We're going to talk about factors that impact our mental health at work. We're going to talk about our stressors. We're going to talk about our stress response. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about mental health at work. And then, as I said, wrapping up at about 1:15 with the presentation so that we've got time for questions starting at 1:15 so that if anyone has to leave for any reason, you won't be missing too much. And then also you'll get the copy of the recording with the time that the Q&A portion starts. So when I'm at a workshop and someone starts reading their slides to me, I find it super annoying. So I'm going to resist the urge to do that while we're talking today. But just basically wanted to highlight that there's a couple of different things that when we're talking about our mental health, and particularly when we look at it with respect to work, there's a couple of different terms that tend to get used. Burnout is really about that sense that it's just too much. You can't take anymore. You're kind of at the limit of what you can handle. And it's also now a recognized condition by the World Health Organization. Anxiety, also a diagnosable condition, but is also something that we tend to feel at different levels throughout our days and throughout our lives. And it's just really, one of the definitions I heard of it recently that I quite liked was by Lisa Damore, who's a psychologist that works mostly with children. And she commented about how anxiety is one of our body's warning systems, that something's going on that we need to pay attention to. And I thought that was a pretty neat way to think about it. It can get out of control. Hi, my cat Mo is here. He's coming to say hi, as he often does. So it tends to be persistent, a little intrusive, and can really impair our ability to do the things that we want to do. Stress, that's the biological reaction to a potential threat. And it's just the thing that we feel a lot of. Stress isn't inherently good or inherently bad, but it is something that happens to us through our lives. Some stress is good, some is bad. Where it gets to be challenging is that when it's unmanaged or when it's exceeding our ability to manage or to adapt to it. And then overwhelm is that feeling of workload and expectations being higher than what you've got time to deal with, and you just kind of feel like you've had enough. So overwhelm can easily tilt into burnout, but they're not necessarily the same thing. Some of the contributing factors to burnout. So if you're, raise your hand if you're a type A person. Type A's are particularly prone to burnout because we tend to have really high expectations of ourselves and we work super duper duper hard. We also sometimes, and this is pretty common for women, we maybe have a sense that we're not really doing everything we could be, or we're not our best. People, Black, Indigenous, and people of color also have that bit of a sense sometimes too of needing to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. And so for anyone with a marginalized identity, burnout can really rear its head because there's a higher level of expectations that are often placed on us, both individually and by the culture. There's also a number of other things relating to our work environment that can contribute to our burnout, sense of burnout, or that feeling of overwhelm. And so just an important moment to, take a note and look through some of them and wonder and maybe think about which one of these can apply to you and your workplace. Some of the common signs and symptoms that we see, there's that reduced sense of energy, that feeling like you're working super hard and can't get anything done. Also, sometimes that lower motivation and just not really feeling connected to or engaged with your work. When I've experienced burnout in the workplace, one of the other pieces that I sometimes feel is just like that sense that like nothing is going my way and everyone's out to get me. And it's just like, if everyone would just leave me alone and let me do my job, I could get this stuff done. So there's a bunch of different things that can contribute to it. Just important to be aware of what some of them are so that we can be on the lookout. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges is the impact of unmanaged stress, which can have a huge impact on our mental well-being, contributes to those senses of overwhelm and burnout. And it's, it goes into the slide here talks a little bit about some of them. I'm not going to read through them, but the important thing to remember is that when your body is experiencing stress, you're moving into your really more of that primitive brain. You're that fight, flight, or freeze response. And you're not using your higher level thinking. You're not connecting with your most creative, most innovative, and most organized self. And so that's where we start to see some of that impact on performance. And it makes it, just generally harder to work with others and to work on your own. It also impacts your well-being. It has a negative impact on your physical well-being. There's health impacts of being in the stress response, as well as it impacts your mental ability to, process complex thoughts. It can have a negative impact on how you're feeling. And then also you're just a little more irritable. And, I have this one as like the last bullet, but I think it's actually the most important. And that's that living in a state of chronic stress and overwhelm is just a crummy way to live. It doesn't feel good in our bodies, and it's really unpleasant for our mental health. And so it's one of those things where we can impact it, it's really important that we do. So, how do we do that? How do we prevent overwhelm and burnout? How do we manage our stress so that it isn't having that negative impact on us? And it's really a two-piece thing because the stress has two parts to it. The first is the stressor, which is the thing that causes you to be stressed. So, for example, I'm driving down the street to an appointment, and all of a sudden, I hit traffic. If you're from Calgary, I drive on Glenmore often when I'm going places, and Glenmore is renowned for its bizarre traffic at all times of day. And so if I hit traffic on Glenmore, I'm going to get into a stress response because I'm now worried I'm going to be late. So my breathing's going to become more shallow. My body's going to tense up a little. My digestion's going to slow. There's a whole cascade of physiological, so in my body reactions that are happening because my brain, my beautiful brain, doesn't know the difference between traffic in Glenmore and the threat of a saber-toothed tiger. And so it's reacting like there's a physical threat to my life, even though it's just traffic and it's annoying. So that the traffic's the stressor, but all of the cascade of things that happen in my body and in my brain in response to the traffic, that's the stress response. And so in order for me to help support my body and my brain and to prevent burnout, prevent chronic stress, I have to do what I can to address both the stressor, so the traffic, and the stress response, which is how all of my response to the traffic is showing up in my body and my brain. Now, we don't always get to control those stressors. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit more and how we can deal with them. But first, I want to talk a bit about some of the more common stressors that we tend to see at work. So they tend to fall into three main buckets when we're looking at workload. And to be frank, this can also translate over into our personal lives. So workload at home or at work is that feeling of not enough time, not feeling like there's communication around your priorities, not having influence, and not being able to talk about your concerns. The relationships, again, could be at work, could be at home, but have how you react and relate with the person in your immediate supervisor, or your members of your team, can really have an impact on how much stress you feel at work and what that can be a real source of stressors for you. If you have friends at work, people who you can talk to and commiserate with, can really act as a mitigating factor. So, minimizing some of the concerns around your mental health at work and supporting you to manage your stressors by having those relationships. Now, right now, many people are working from home due to COVID-19. And so those work relationships can be a little bit harder to maintain. And that's where, you might hop on a phone call over your coffee break, or, text one another through the day. That kind of thing can help. But you also just want to make sure that you're not going to end up having that have a negative impact on the workload side of things. The other piece is the workplace culture, or the culture in your home. So, how do people feel about one another? Do they feel like they're part of a team, or is this or are you working in an everyone for themselves kind of environment? Are breaks encouraged or frowned upon? And does the spoken norms, like the written culture of the organization, line up with the unspoken norms? So, I don't know about you, but I've had experience working in places where we say things like, oh, we want to, make sure that you're feeling healthy and part of the team and we all work together like a family. But then when you raise concerns, you're dismissed, or there's an unspoken rule that breaks are frowned upon. And so then the only people that ever step away from their desk other than for a bathroom break are the smokers who are going outside, which then I think just contributes to an environment where people are more likely to smoke, which has other health consequences. But, things like that. I think we've all had an experience where even though, you're told you can take a break if you need to, it's really not supported in the culture. So the impact of the workplace culture can be one of the common stressors. So in a way, these three pieces really work together of, the work that you're doing and that you're expected to do, the relationships with the people at work, and then the broader culture that undermines or underpins all of it, and sometimes does undermine it. So when we're dealing with our stressors, at the end of the day, there's some that we can change and influence and some that we can't. So for example, back to our traffic analogy, I can't control what happens on Glenmore at the time that I'm driving. It is completely outside of my hands what other people are doing. But the thing that I can control is how much buffer time I gave myself to get where I'm going. Because if I'm, cutting it really close to the start time of my meeting and I find traffic, I'm gonna be so stressed out about being late. But if I give myself that extra bit of time and plan ahead for the fact that there could be traffic, and maybe give myself, a 10 or 15-minute buffer so that I'm going to arrive early, then that traffic's not going to be as stressful. So, where we can, we want to think about identifying the root cause, thinking about what's causing our stress. Can we do anything to change it? So, for example, leaving earlier. And if you can't, what can you do to minimize the impact of the stressful experience on you, or to support yourself either before or after? Another example is sometimes when I'm giving a presentation, I get really nervous and talk super fast. So, one of the things I can do to support myself in that is to take a little bit of time before the meeting starts, before the presentation starts, take a few deep breaths, block off the half hour ahead of it so that I'm not rushing from one bit of work into the presentation, but have that time to kind of center and calm myself. And then I usually block off, enough time to have a quiet cup of tea by myself afterwards. And then just also for everyone, when I send out the link with the recording, I'll also be including a workbook for you that you can use to bring some of these lessons from today into your daily lives. So part of the workbook's actually going to have a spot where you can work through what some of the root causes of your stress are, and making plans for how to address them, that kind of thing, and also a list of some of the common stressors that you may wish to consider. So once we know what's causing our stress and what it is underlying it, because it's important to note that the thing that causes us stress isn't always the thing that is the thing that's causing us stress in the moment isn't always the root cause of the stress. I like to think of if you think about a full cup of water, there's that kind of surface tension, which is an appropriate analogy, really, where if it's like kind of full but not like super duper overflowing, it can even like rise above the top of the cup. And it's like it's all hanging in there, just barely hanging together. And then you add one drop of water too many, and the whole thing spills and it like drops to below the level of the cup. If you've never seen this happen, or if it's been a while, I recommend that you put in a cup of water in the sink so you don't have too much mess to clean up. But see how it happens and see how that one last drop can really make a difference. And so when we think about our own lives, the thing that caused it, there's a real parallel. And the thing that causes the whole thing to overflow, so the thing that causes us to flip our lid, as it may be, isn't necessarily the things that were filling up the rest of the cup. Because if the cup had had space, that last drop of water wouldn't have caused it to spill over. It was all of the things that were there beforehand that had an impact. And so thinking about what it is that might be adding to your cup feeling, your stress cup feeling full. And then from there, where are the things that you can adjust? What can you change? And again, if you can change it, how can you support yourself? When we look at the things that we can change, we want to think about how we're going to go about changing them. Oftentimes, it means a conversation with another person. And so I recommend making a plan for that conversation, identifying not just the problem, but some potential solutions, as well as what it is that you really need from that person in that conversation. So, for example, if you have a boss that emails you at all hours of the night, or a team member that emails you all hours of the night, you might want to have a conversation about, listen, I'm trying to, focus on work during work hours. Can we keep the emergencies to, like, can we try and save emails for during the workday? I'm not going to answer emails in the evening unless they're an emergency. And also, I don't really want to check because I'd like to have some break time so that my brain can recharge. Can we maybe, if there's an emergency that comes up, can you call me on the phone or send me a text message or something like that? So thinking of those as solutions. I recommend practicing a conversation. So you can use your handy Zoom link and record yourself talking if you like. Also, if you're like me, you might practice conversations repeatedly to yourself while you're like brushing your teeth or doing your hair. And that's okay to do. If you've got someone you can practice the conversation with and can offer some feedback, that can be really helpful. When you're having the conversation, use I statements and maybe say things like, I notice, or this is what I need, and here's how we can work together. I also really like one of the frames that Brene Brown has for these conversations, which is to talk about having the conversation as if it's you and me versus the problem, as opposed to you versus me. So we're going to work together on the solutions, as opposed to I'm going to tell you what I need and you're going to do it. And then another way that you can help with your stressors, of course, is through healthy work habits. We're going to get into this a little bit more as we get into some of the common stressors that we see. But really, things like avoiding multitasking is really important because our brains actually don't do two things at once. What happens is you're task switching, and it can really impact your ability to focus and increase your stress level. It's also important to make sure that you understand what's expected of you and deadlines, things like that. Try and avoid sprints and like rests from work as much as possible. Try and think about it as a marathon that you're running. So you want to try and keep that steady pace as opposed to breakneck speed, crash, breakneck speed, crash. And then taking regular breaks has a huge impact on our well-being. One of my favorite secrets for taking lots of breaks is, and making sure you're having breaks, but also that you're not like worried about it too much, is drinking lots of water. It's really good for your body, but also then you have to go use the restroom more often. And so that's a way to take like just a little break. Leave your phone on your desk so that you have a chance to just let your brain stop thinking about work for a couple minutes, refill your water, come right back. Probably gone for less than 5 minutes, but it's really great for your brain to recharge in that way. So dovetailing nicely with that, want to talk about two common stressors that people experience. One of them is workload. As I said, it tends to be a common bucket, but it can approach us in different ways. It can come at us from different directions. But really, when we're thinking about workload as a stressor, it's really just that sense that you have too much to do, not enough time to do it in, and the expectations don't feel like they're appropriate. This has been found to be one of the 13 factors that can impact mental health in the workplace. So it's really important to think about how you approach your workload. Part of that, again, breaks. Also, being realistic about the time that you have. So, if I've got a list of 20 things I want to do, which is a light week, if I'm honest, if I look at that and then I'm like, okay, this thing's going to take 20 minutes, this thing's going to take half an hour, this one's going to be 3 hours, like looking through and kind of pinpointing how long I expect everything will take. And then looking at my calendar, and if I've got like 30 hours of meetings in a 40-hour week, I probably don't have time to get all those things done. So then I have to start prioritizing. I have to start looking at the time I have, looking at how long things are going to take, and slotting in what is going to be able to be actually done this week. What that means too, when we talk about prioritizing, is it doesn't mean the other stuff's never going to happen. It's just not happening right now. And ultimately, one of the ways that you can do this, especially when you work with someone else, maybe part of a team, or you've got a supervisors who monitoring your workload, or has expectations for you as well, is to, as you're prioritizing the top three areas that you want to focus on that week, is to have that communication and that conversation with your manager and with your team. One of the things I recommend is on Friday afternoons to send an email to your manager, or if you have a really team focused workplace, updating the team and just kind of highlighting what you expect will be the top three things that you'll be working on outside of meetings time for your coming week. The other thing that is helpful from this is, so it's helpful on the one hand, because then you've got your three things set, but by sending it over to them and giving them an opportunity to review it, you can make sure that you and your manager are on the same page about the top three things you should be working on, because they might have thought that something else was a higher priority, or assumed that you were going to be working on another item that didn't make your top three. And so then that gives that opportunity to have a conversation with it and make sure that you're on the same page about the workload. And if they look at it and say, well, I was hoping you'd do those three plus this other thing, that's when you can then turn around and say, you know what, I can do that. But the challenge that I've got is that I've got, 10 hours of non-meeting time this week. So can we talk about if there's some of these meetings I can skip? Because maybe you don't need to be at all of the meetings. Maybe a colleague can give you some information, and maybe that extra little bit of time, that extra meeting or two that you're not attending, will free up more time for you to be able to work on your tasks. And so having that line of communication about priorities and workload for the week can be a really helpful way to address some of that stressor, while also making sure that your manager knows what you're working on. Some other helpful tips are both time blocking and the Pomodoro technique, which are sort of related but separate. So time blocking is when we take our calendar and literally block off times to be working on focus work. So for example, you're going to maybe put a block of time, an hour, maybe longer, depending on what your schedule looks like for your meetings, where you're going to focus on your specific tasks that are in your priority list. So maybe you'll block off the time that you think priority one is going to take, then priority two, and then priority three. I recommend leaving a little bit of buffer time. Things often take longer than we think they will, but then also sometimes stuff comes up. So then if you have an extra block that you can go to, then that's helpful. In my own business, I set that up by limiting my meetings to 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. most days. So people can book meetings with me between 10 and 3, but that leaves me with 8:30 till 10 o'clock to do focus work. And then also 3 to 5, I can focus on whatever priorities I have for that day, plus any of the other free time that ends up being not booked to my calendar, but then I know I've got those chunks of time. Pomodoro technique is a good way to get really focused and get a fair bit done in your time blocks that you have. And how this one works is you set a timer for 25 minutes. A key piece of this is to turn off all of your notifications, close your email inbox. And while your timer is going, you are just focused on one task. So if that's, priority number 2 is in this time block, you're just going to focus 25 minutes, get as much of the work as you can done, working at a steady pace. When your timer goes off, you're going to take a 5-minute break, maybe hit the washroom, refill your water, grab a snack, come back, do it again. So you repeat this over a series of 25-minute work sprints with 5-minute breaks. They recommend usually after 3 or 4, depending on your brain and your personality, to take a longer break. But what's good about this is it kind of tags into some of our natural rhythms. And I find it's super effective on those days when your focus feels all over the place, or where you're feeling like for those tasks that you know you have to do, but you're not really feeling it with them and you're kind of avoiding them. Pomodoro is a great way to nail through those. Another area that we see a lot of challenge with for stressors is around balance. So, that sense that family, life, work, all the rest of our life, that competition. Now, I know some people say that work-life balance is impossible and they hate the term. And if that's you, that's cool. But I think that balance isn't necessarily a definition of 50-50, but rather that sense that I feel okay with how much time work and the rest of my life is taking up. I also think it's important to recognize that balance isn't just work and the rest of life, but work and family, work and friendships, work and personal time, and downtime for the things that recharge us. There's a few elements of the other side of the equation, and making sure that you've got time for all of those is really important too. And I say this particularly to all the mothers on the call, because it has been my experience as a mother and then also with other mothers that we tend to put our needs towards the bottom of the list and forget to schedule time for ourselves. And it's really important for us to be great at work and great in our families to make sure that we have time for ourselves. So some of the ways we can increase balance is, I mentioned earlier, setting some boundaries around time. So maybe having the conversation where you agree that any emails that come in during work hours are going to get responded to promptly, but anything after 5:30 or 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. or whatever time you set is going to wait till the next day. And let your team know that, let your manager know that, maybe let your clients know that, but let them know that there's another way to reach you. So maybe they'll call on the phone or send a text. And then what you can do is you can turn off the notifications on your email that comes to your phone, because this is the other challenge for balance these days is we have our cell phones with us. Most of us have our work emails on our cell phones. We've got our personal emails on our cell phone. We've got our social media, like everything's there. Our whole lives are in these like little squares. And so changing how your notifications appear so that you're not tempted to check the emails can really help. That said, sometimes it's helpful to see the notifications, so especially if people are getting used to this, so that you know that there's nothing critical. Personally, the way I've got my notifications set up on my phone is I have my work email separate from my personal email addresses. And it comes up when an email comes in, there's the who it's from, the header, and a little preview so that I can decide to like flip to clear it or flip to open it. Clear it if it's something that doesn't need my immediate attention, but if an email comes in that does, then I can open it and pay attention to it. For me, that's really helped to set balance and that boundary. Your mileage may vary and what works for you is going to be a little bit different. So I really recommend trying out the different things. Where possible, also trying to negotiate some flexibility in your workplace. So especially with the pandemic, when many of us had our kids suddenly at home or family members suddenly home, we're suddenly at home. There's a lot more to juggle and negotiate. And so where you can, having those conversations of what you need to feel like you've got your stuff together versus how to versus just assuming that everything like that you have to be at your desk 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. Maybe it's the sort of thing where you could work a little bit sooner, take a bit of a break if you've got stuff to take care of with your family, or with personal appointments that you need to take care of, and then coming back later, maybe after hours, or just adjusting the time, making it up at another point. So having those conversations and framing them up again with that, using the conversation tips that we talked about earlier, and then trying to find a solution that works both for you and for the organization you work for. The workbook that I mentioned also has some information about preparing for those conversations. So that would be one where you could use that. Another really important piece is making sure you're taking your time off. I know it's really hard right now when we can't really go anywhere, and we're home generally, especially for all of us who are working from home. But taking that time off to rest and recharge is really important for managing your stress response, as well as limiting your stressors. You're going to go into work feeling more refreshed, more ready to tackle the day and whatever comes up if you've taken some time off. So whether your favorite pastime is watching TV, reading a book, knitting, gossiping on the phone with your best friend, calling your mom, like whatever it is, do something that feels good for you. Maybe mix it up day to day. There's lots of options that we can still do, even though so many of our things are limited. Doing things that help to move your body are also really helpful for your wellness and self-care. And we'll get into that a bit more in a few moments. Another option is that tech Sabbath. So the idea of setting aside some time where you do not check your tech. Some people say a whole day. That gives me heart palpitations. I have worked up to 3 hours. But taking some time where maybe on a weekend you're just not going to check your phone for a little while. You can work on up to that and see how it goes. And then where possible, being creative about solutions around finding balance. So maybe that's, if you've got young kids, your partner can trade off time so that each of you has a bit of like free time to do whatever you want, maybe connect with friends, maybe just like have a bath, whatever it is that you need to do so that you're feeling better, looking for solutions both for work and personal life. So, moving into a conversation about the stress response, it's really important to remember that this is what our bodies do without any conscious impact from us. And it has two pieces. One is the physical response, and that's the things where like muscles tensing, flood of hormones. And so when we are dealing with the stress response and getting ourselves back to our normal baseline, which admittedly for some of us can be up here, what we want to do is try and work it down, and get our stress levels kind of as low as possible so that we have more capacity to deal with stressful things when they arise. In order to do that, there's two pieces that we have to pay attention to. One is the physical side of it and closing up the physical response, and the other is the social response. So there's Emily and Amelia Nagoski wrote a really brilliant book called Burnout, Unlocking the Secrets of the Stress Cycle, is I believe the subtitle. Brilliant book talking about burnout and adapting to it. And some of the things they talk about is, in our saber-toothed tiger days, what would happen is we would see the tiger, we would freak out, we'd have our stress response, we'd run. So that would be us resolving this physical response as we escape. And then we'd get back to our family, our community, our village, and we'd be able to connect with them and help kind of ease the social side of it and have kind of that healing in community. And I think that's really one of the themes of this week and this day is healing in community and sharing in community. And so as we're responding to it, we want to do things like that help our body to complete the flight or fight response. Because when I'm stuck in traffic in Glenmore, I am not able to run and complete that part, but my body needs me to. So anything that we can do to move our body in a way that's comfortable for us is really helpful. Feeling our emotions and letting them go, so having that big cry, it's actually really cathartic for a reason. It's helping your body complete the stress cycle. And I recognize that we don't always get the opportunity to move our bodies immediately. But what the researchers found, what the Nagoski sisters found in their research, was that if you just take the time to tense and release your muscles slowly, one at a time, maybe starting at your from your toes and working your way up your body, so tighten and release, that actually can have a similar response in terms of like bringing down our physical response to stress as things like going for a run are. So, the thing is, if you're sitting in a meeting or on a conference call, no one can tell you're clenching and releasing your toes. So it's a good way to help process stress in those moments. And then the social piece, wanting to make sure that we're connecting with family or friends in whatever way we can, of course, with the restrictions around COVID-19, in-person gatherings and those hugs that we all miss are not on the table, but there are other ways that we can connect. Hearing someone's voice, whether it's over a video call or a telephone call, has a stronger impact on us than reading their words in email or text or the like. So wherever possible, try and have an opportunity to hear someone's voice. The way that our brains are wired, we respond differently to people's voices than we do to their written words, because as our language developed, we heard language long before we were able to read language. So it's just an interesting holdover from our prehistoric selves, but just an important thing to keep in mind. So given the chance between, a phone call with your best friend and a series of texts, try and do the phone call if you can. This also then dovetails into the conversation around self-care. It's not about bubble baths and manis, though those are also fantastic. But what self-care is really about is finding ways to support ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so making sure that we are doing things on a daily basis that support us. Physical doesn't have to be going for a run. It might just be like putting on some music and doing a dance party in your kitchen, doing some stretches, something like that, whatever works for you and your body. And recognizing that we don't always have time or energy for self-care, especially when we're like, I need to go work out for an hour for it to count. Like there's this notion in our culture that we have to go big or go home, and that's wrong. That's not what the research shows. In fact, doing small things can really add up. So taking the time to, take a quick walk, even just standing outside. Now, right now I'm in Calgary and it is cold outside. So standing outside is not maybe the best idea, but going for a quick walk to check my mail, that can really help. That's a way to get quick little break and a little bit of self-care in, which doesn't involve a ton of time. 5 deep breaths, especially when you think about exhaling longer than you're inhaling for, has a huge impact. And even simple things like just, a couple of stretches, some shoulder rolls, neck rolls, whatever, wherever your tight spots are, find a stretch that works for them. There's a ton of research, or pardon me, ton of resources online that have like quick little stretches. YouTube's got loads for spots that target where we're sore when we sit at a desk. So, taking some time to find a couple that are your favorites and doing those when you can. And then again, just closing your eyes and deep breathing for a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Whether you're thinking about things at the same time or not, trying to just focus on the breath, maybe counting your breath, like how long it takes to breathe in, how long it takes to breathe out, or simply counting 1 with each inhale and 2 with the exhale, go up to 10 and count back. Those are some really simple meditations. Or maybe just choosing to listen to a song that you really like, a quiet song, um, or an instrumental type thing while closing your eyes and not focusing on anything else, or even just like softening your gaze and staring off at the wall can be a really great way to incorporate a little bit of meditation and mindfulness into your day. So before we get to the Q&A, I just wanted to talk a little bit more very quickly about the role of mental health at work, because it has a huge impact on all of us and how we experience our workplace. And we talked earlier about the impact of culture and things like that on the workplace. But when we're talking about mental health at work, it's not just the impact for folks who are living with a mental illness or a mental health condition or struggling with their mental health. And it's not just incidences of bullying and harassment. Those are all things that are part of mental health at work, but it's also about the general sense of wellness and well-being in a workplace, and whether the workplace and the relationships in it are helping people's well-being or if they're maybe neutral or harmful. I think we've probably all had an experience working in a negative work environment or a toxic work environment, and it can really bleed into the rest of our lives. It makes doing those other things to manage stress and burnout so much harder. And so while it's important for us to all learn what we can to support our own well-being at work, it's also really important for our workplaces to identify and address the things that are undermining mental health at work more broadly. So it matters because it has a huge impact on businesses. It impacts productivity, interactions, how people show up with bandwidth, and just like literally every piece of the workday. And the challenge really is that, sometimes organizations that I work with are like, yeah, we don't really want to deal with this right now. Can't we just give people the tools? The challenge, though, is if you don't deal with some of the underlying factors, they'll just bubble up again. I can give you, as individuals, every single tool. Your organization can dump all of the money into your extended health benefits for psychological and psychiatric help. But if the underlying factors that are impacting how you feel as a person at your workplace aren't addressed, that help's not going to matter. And people are just going to keep experiencing burnout, overwhelm, and really high stress levels. At the same time, just addressing the factors without addressing, giving folks the tools to support their own mental well-being means that when things go sideways, they're going to be less resilient. So it's really important to address some of that, and then also to make sure that we're fixing the workplace culture disconnect. So that's the moment where, the culture that we talk about as an organization, or the one you heard about in your job interview, how it's a great place to work, people are treated like family, and then your actual experience in your workplace. Sometimes those are like, nice and tight. Sometimes they even overlap. Sometimes they're so far apart that you're not sure you're working for the same company. And so that is what I call the workplace culture disconnect. And we want to do everything that we can to bridge that gap and bring the experienced culture and the actual culture and the planned culture closer together. Because that's the kind of stuff, like workplace culture is the sort of thing that when people can, they will leave an organization if they don't support the culture, or if they don't feel like they belong as part of the team, or they don't feel like they're like the employer cares about them. When we're in economic challenging times, people sometimes stick around because they don't have a lot of other options. But I don't know, I feel like, we all want to aspire to a workplace where we're staying because we like it and we like the team we're working with, not because we need the paycheck. The paycheck's part of it always. But we want it to be more than just that. And then of course, the other challenge is, currently we've got that bit of a triple whammy of COVID, the disruptions to our routines, and then also additional economic pressures. As I said, I'm here in Calgary, and the Calgary economy has been struggling for many years, since the fall of 2014. And so that's had huge impacts across sectors, and other communities have experienced similar things. And because of the impacts of coronavirus, a lot of communities are struggling. And so having all of that coming together is kind of it's lifted everyone's baseline stress level to be higher than it was before. And so doing what we can now to support people's well-being at work is really important. So there's lots of information that I can share about creating a plan, but I did promise that we'd finish the content by 1:15, so I'm going to just super quick go over this. Later, when you get the link to the video, if you want to pause and come back to this, that's awesome. But basically, finding out, what your team needs and where you can best focus your efforts, recognizing that right now, time, money, and mental bandwidth are at a premium. So you want to make sure that you're having the most impact for the least effort, least time, least money. And that's something that a workplace psychological health and safety advisor like myself can really help to make sure that you're focusing your efforts as an organization where they need to go. So learning more, you can check out the workbook. I'll be emailing it, a copy of our slides, and a link to the workshop replay to you all by end of day Friday. Probably sooner, but for sure end of day Friday. Also, if you've got any questions that you have, or you're wondering about beating stress and burnout at your work or workplace mental health, you can book a call to chat with me a bit about it at that link. The link will be in the email as well. So don't feel you have to hurriedly write it down, but it'll have all of the information that you need there, and we can book a call and just chat a little bit about what's going on, and maybe offer some suggestions for things that your workplace could do. So that leaves us too at 1:16 on this calendar clock, our question period. So I'm going to stop sharing. And then we have some time for questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please just pop them in the chat, and Carla will share them with me. And we'll start with the first one that we have right here. So the question says, and I'm just going to look down and read it. My workload is really high and my boss is really demanding. I'm worried that if I set boundaries, it'll look like I don't care about my job or that I'll be penalized. How should I handle this? Whoa, that's a big question, and really tough. And I think actually more common than I think most of us want to admit, especially when we're looking at a period where there's a lot of pressure on folks to do more with less in the workplace. We mentioned earlier about the challenges around the kind of doing more with less, and the economic challenges. And a lot of folks are experiencing a challenge where they're having that expectation, not just to do more with less, but also with the threat of further cuts coming down the pike. And so everyone then in that sort of a work environment is trying to do everything that they can to stay on top of the workload, look like they're a high performer, and kind of to almost like trying to protect oneself from any of the risk of layoff or possible job cuts. So balancing that with trying to maintain a workload that works for you can be really, really tricky. Because you've kind of got that competing factor of you want to be able to perform at your best. So you need to take breaks and manage your workload, but you also want to look like you're a real team player and you're working really hard. So you don't want to be like, taking extended lunch breaks or necessarily booking off all of your vacation time and things like that. So when we look at how to navigate a situation like this, there's a couple pieces we want to think about. One of them is, really understanding that taking breaks and working a reasonable number of hours is not about slacking off. It's actually about being your most productive and on point self at work. It's about making sure that you've got the bandwidth and the capacity to do the work that you're expected to do to the best of your ability. It also means that you're going to be more focused and more on point, more productive in the hours that you're working. And it's really interesting because there's been a lot of research on this. And what they found is that people who work like a 40-hour week, taking breaks, working at a reasonable pace, are more productive, not just equally productive, but more productive than people doing like 50, 60-hour weeks, not taking those breaks. Because what ends up happening is our brains can only focus for so long. And if you're not taking a break, if you're not planning that break, that's when we do something like check the email and all of a sudden an hour has passed and we don't know what we've done. Or, get lost on a Twitter or Facebook or Instagram vortex in the office, things like that. If we don't give our brain breaks, it's going to take them for us. And so really planning to build that into your day is really important so that you can stay focused and be productive and show that you're doing the best job possible. Now, if you've got an employer who's really looking for butt in chair time, and if you're not sitting in your chair, it's going to be judged against you, then I think that's where we want to be a little creative about taking our breaks. So things like drinking lots of water so that you need to then take a bathroom break every hour, hour and a half can be helpful. And while you're doing that, maybe take a little bit longer, do a couple stretches before you sit back down at your desk. So doing the things to support you in the short periods of time that you're taking. Maybe you don't have time for a longer like coffee break midday, and that's okay. But if you can, taking those shorter breaks interspersed throughout your morning and afternoon. For your lunchtime, make sure you're taking at least a half-hour break. So don't eat your lunch at your desk. And while you're taking your lunch break, eat your food at your kitchen table. Don't look at your phone. I sometimes listen to podcasts because they stop me from looking at the rest of my phone. Or maybe you've got someone you can like hop on a call where you're not going to talk about work, but just like kind of catch up on how they're doing, that kind of thing. That can be helpful. But doing something where you're just going to be able to focus on eating and then maybe pop on your shoes and your boot or your boots and your coat and do a quick little walk. Maybe go, if you've got community mailboxes in your community, go grab something, grab your mail and come on back. Or, do a quick little walk around the block, something like that, just to get a little bit of movement and a little bit of a break into your day is going to be really helpful for you in terms of being able to manage your workload. And then it's also because it's a shorter break, it's a half hour, you're able to then really like stay on point, on focus. This is also one of those instances where you're really going to want to have an open line of communication with your boss about where you're setting priorities, the work you're focusing on any given week and any given day. And then also that's where conversations about meetings are going to be really important. So taking the time to look at your calendar, identify where you can block off time for focused work. And then if you don't have enough time for focused work with stuff that you're expected to complete by the end of the week, engaging in that conversation with your boss, saying, listen, this is how long this stuff's going to take me. But I only have this many, like if you have the number of meetings I have, I really want to be focused and give my full attention at the meetings that I'm attending. Are there any of the ones like, can we talk about maybe me skipping this meeting, or can we reschedule our, maybe one of the team meetings, can we reschedule it, or can we shorten it by a little bit so that I'll have more time to do the follow-up work from it, things like that. And so really engaging in that conversation with your boss and doing what you can to, present it as I want to do the best work possible. Here are some suggestions for ways that we can do this. How can we work this together? Hopefully that helps. And again, if you've got any more questions or, as you try and do this, if it's got any challenges, then again, please feel free to, book that call with me and we can talk a little bit about it a little bit more. All right, well, that looks like it for the questions. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate this. And hey, if you're watching this on the replay later, feel free to send me an email at brandy@brandypayne.ca. That's BRANDY at BRANDYPAYNE.ca. I'll pop that in the chat too. So feel free to send me an email if you'd like to get a copy of the slides, the workbook, or the link to the recording. I'll send that on over to you. And other than that, I just wanted to wish you a very happy Let's Talk Day and wish you all the best with your mental health and your mental health at work and for beating stress and burnout. Thanks so much. It was great to have you. Bye.